Hello and welcome to Highlander Newsroom, a program that discusses articles and issues covered in the Highlander newspaper at UC Riverside. My name is Fatema Shalabi and I'm the managing editor at the Highlander and your host for today. I'm joined by Abhijit Rege, the news editor, Hansel Chu, the assistant sports editor, and Siddhant Gupta, the copy editor. We have a few interesting topics lined up for discussion today, so let's go ahead and get started. So first up in this newspaper issue is an article written by our staff writer, Isabel Nakastone. She discusses the effects that working from home and via websites like Zoom have had on the workplace, explaining that they've contributed to a more casual working environment. She also mentions certain practices that can be implemented into the workplace, like mental health services and even limiting hours worked at home. Which practices do you think are important for workplaces to consider when trying to improve the lives of their employees? Sinan?
I feel like mental health is a huge factor that companies need to consider now, especially with the pandemic. I really like how she brought a lot of facts like from the Harvard Business School and showing how work hours have increased. And I think that's a big thing because since we're online, or most businesses are online, it's a good reason she brought up how it's hard to find the difference between like home and business life. And I think I've also found that in the start of the pandemic, although it's not the same as work, like school life. Um, in the beginning, I used to have my computer actually in my room, and I found it hard or very like distracting to concentrate. But when I moved to like another room, like kind of like an office space, then I found it like easier to separate the two, and more like having those two separate, and it creates a better like learning experience, I guess, for online at the time. And I also thought how like Zoom meetings are creating this casual environment of how you can see into someone's home, and how this is something that we don't usually think when it comes to like online. And then yeah, I feel like especially with mental health and people losing sleep and not getting enough time for themselves, that's a huge thing. And there has to be like changes for that. So if it's taking like maybe staggered days off, or stuff like that, to kind of build a sense of breaks and kind of like keep up productivity for employees.
I totally relate to like at first starting off quarantine with having like my computer in my room and then moving it out because I did that exact same thing. I really needed a sort of separation between work and home, and like not having that was driving me really crazy. So I did do that, which is like I love that you mentioned that because that was really important to me. And I feel like not like downplaying COVID. Of course, it's been a really terrible thing, and like so much bad has come from it, but in the sense of like quarantine and like this time, I do think that in many ways we've sort of improved the way that like American workplaces handle their sort of like conflicts, or the way that they appreciate their employees more. I mean, I'd like to hope and I feel that nowadays like workplaces are more open to helping their employees out with mental health services, like you mentioned and like the article mentions, and then also just making sure that employees have the time that they need as well. I think employees in some certain like workplaces, they've actually become more open and kind of letting their employer know like what's going on in their lives, because I mean this has just been a hard time for like all of us. So I do think that some of these changes have been good, and they can be continued on throughout like the end of the pandemic, hopefully, and continuing on further.
I mean, for me, I definitely agree too. I like in 2020, I was lucky enough to kind of intern at a business accounting company, and to say like the stereotypical workplace is very true. Like you see in those movies such as like Wolf of Wall Street and all the other ones where you kind of have this typical cramped, kind of boxy, isolated workplace. That's also very true in the place that I worked at. It seemed very isolated, and one of the rules they had was just like you can't listen to any music with like your AirPods or earphones, like you were only able to listen to the music that they gave you, which is like classical music. And for me, I found that, kind of hard sometimes to get production done because, you know, I don't listen to classical music, and some of the stuff I was doing was pretty boring as well. So I love how they're making business workplace a little bit more casual. So I think that that would increase productivity, allowing, something like maybe allowing workers to be able to listen to their own music with headphones or AirPods, or maybe even just casually lighten up the dress code. Maybe instead of wearing such business casual, like just business attire, maybe line it up where they can wear street clothes a little bit, or once per day, or maybe like twice per week. So steps in just making the workplace seem not so formal and a little bit more casual. It just brings a different type of energy and life into the workplace.
I think that's actually so like important that you mentioned that, because I mean, during this whole time of us being remote and like in quarantine, like obviously the biggest change that sort of occurred is that we're no longer working in person. We're working from home, like from the comfort of our own homes. And like Siddhant mentioned before, how you're basically giving people a view into like your room or your home, and you're allowing allowing them into that personal space. And it's just like you're mentioning, Hansel. During this time, we've kind of gotten used to doing whatever we want to do while we're at home working. Like we can be listening to music or doing something else, and our bosses or our coworkers could, like, they don't know about any of that just because they're not able to witness it. So I feel like maybe carrying in some of those like freedoms into the workplace can prove to be beneficial for like just the lives of employees, and like improve the workplace as a whole by not making it so uptight and allowing for those freedoms.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that whole sentiment, just because, I mean, with the pandemic and, the remote learning and working environment, all these changes that were happening, it's really a good time to reflect on the workplace environment and trying to, improve it for not only just comfort, but, ease for both our mental health as well as our physical health, because it's definitely one thing to consider that with, this change to a more remote working environment, that a lot of us are just kind of sitting in place the whole time. We're at home, we're kind of being a little lazy. And then there's also the other side of it where we got places like Amazon packing facilities and other places like that where people are being, scattered to work harsh hours and put a lot of physical strain on themselves. So it's definitely a lot of consideration beyond just your mental health to also consider your own physical health as well, to make sure that you're getting, the ample amount of exercise in between, your work hours, and not making sure you don't overwork yourself and stay too long in front of a screen, I guess. But at the same time, you also want to make sure you're not overworking yourself too much, and to make sure you get enough rest. And I understand with these pandemic, there's a lot of changes that come to, finances, and a lot of people are struggling, but make sure to, focus on your health first and make sure you're not overstressing yourself. And I definitely agree that a company should put more effort into having a little more of a casual, comfortable style, just because, I mean, especially as we're progressing now with the work environment, the formal work environment is just aged at this point. And it seems that as, the workforce keeps growing younger and younger, it's more open to these more casual settings, such as having music, having entertainment in the background, socializing a little more. And I think having these will all just improve your mental health in numerous ways that I don't think really can be replicated in any other way or form, because it seems that, people are overworking themselves, people are stressed, and the fact that we're at this time period where everything's changing so fast, we're all confused. I think it definitely is a good way just to unwind, just even in between having little breaks here and there, just the little things that help make sure that you don't go crazy when you're at your job, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that's also important too is, I mean, we've all lived through this like time period, and we've all sort of implemented practices in our own lives that have either worked for us or have not worked for us. And I think there's only so much like trust that we can put into our workplaces to like change these aspects that we do not like. So I think definitely trying to carry in some things that you have implemented in this period that do work for you. Like for me, for example, I've been really trying to adhere to like the 9 to 5 messaging and emailing things she mentions in the article, where basically you like really restrain yourself to not message or look at your phone or anything between after and before those time periods. And I mean, just implementing something like that just in the rest of like my professional life, I feel that that'd be very beneficial for me. And then moving into a different topic, and section of this issue, our editorial board discussed the controversies regarding the current Olympics taking place in Beijing, China, as China is currently committing a plethora of human rights violations, including the torturing, forced labor, and sterilization of Uyghur Muslims and other Muslim ethnic minorities in concentration camps. So the US has actually recognized that the Chinese government is currently committing genocide. Yet the International Olympic Committee still chose China as the home for the 2022 Olympics, despite these violations. Do you think that the committee is at fault for making this decision? And do you think it's possible to still support these athletes despite the circumstances?
Considering the circumstances, I definitely feel that it's definitely more on the Olympic Committee themselves as opposed to the athletes. I mean, I definitely feel that those blaming the athletes for attending this event, despite the location of where it takes place and the time period everything's going on, is not really their fault, just because athletes deserve the chance to participate in this competition, considering they're training for them oftentimes for their whole lives for this particular competition. So, you know, if their once in a lifetime chance is taken away just because of politics, I feel that's very unfair to all their training and all the effort that they put in. And I feel that addressing this issue is more beyond just the competition itself and more of a global thing, and considering, you know, all the circumstances going on in China, forced labor, all just everything going on with the whole Uyghur situation. It's really more of the responsibility of the organization of the Olympic Committee, as well as, you know, other committees worldwide, to come together and figure out a solution to at least not support these countries and to have competitions held in these countries where oppressive ideals are perpetrated and all these messed up things are happening. So I definitely hope to see some changes moving forward, and I really hope that the future competitions that take place will be occurring in locations that aren't necessarily violating human rights and the Geneva Convention, etc.
Yeah, I totally see your point. For me, I feel a little bit more indecisive about this. Definitely, I think most of the fault is at all of the fault is at the committee instead of the players. Like the players have no say in where they compete. For me, I'm just a little bit more indecisive about it. I mean, I haven't ever watched the Olympics, and for me, this is even more of a reason this year to not start watching the Olympics. And so I definitely just don't think that, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable really watching the Olympics because of it, just because it's a little weird and it feels a little dystopian for me to just be watching and enjoying the Olympic Games, knowing that just about 2,000 miles away from where these games are occurring are the concentration camps that about 1 million people are being put in. So for me, it feels a little bit more dystopian. I just feel a lot more uncomfortable watching it than I do watching it, than I do not watching it. And something sort of similar actually happened in 2020, where the live action Mulan film actually came out on Disney Plus, and I believe in theaters. I'm not too sure about that, but they basically actually in the credits they cited the province where the concentration camps are occurring as kind of like they credited it in the credits, basically saying that they shot part of the film in that province. And so for that very reason, I did not watch the Mulan film, just because I kind of think it raises a sort of question of like, how far can we take our enjoyment and like just trying to make money at the expense of human rights, if that makes sense. So for me, it just kind of raises that moral question. And for me, I just don't feel comfortable watching it.
I mean, for me, and you can't really blame athletes too much. It's just solely based on the Olympic Committee and how their choices, you know, putting or allowing countries that have human rights violations to be able to host the Olympics. I mean, for these athletes, you only get basically 2 Olympic Games to be able to perform and have a chance at gold. I mean, every Olympics is every 4 years, so by the time two Olympics rolls around, that's already 8 years. That's almost a decade. And for an athlete's physicality and their prime during those years, it's really short for them to be able to have a chance to win at gold. Only the generational talents are able to maybe succeed at 3 or 4 different Olympics. But for most Olympic athletes, their chances is either the first two Olympics that they ever try. So it's not fair for the Olympic athletes to have this blame put on them, because they're literally training basically their whole life to have a chance or two chances of trying to get gold. So it's also the Olympics committee's fault for not allowing these athletes to speak up as well. As in the article we read, it said that these athletes are not allowed to speak up on human right violation acts or stuff that is pressing on their mind. And I kind of attribute this to when in Nazi Germany, when they hosted the Olympics, and one of our American athletes in track and field won gold and protested against Nazi Germany and said like, hey, you know I'm still here. Like I beat you guys. So I feel like if the Olympic Committee allowed, these top athletes to be able to speak up during their gold medal run in these post game interviews, I feel like it would be beneficial to uh, these countries that are, uh, you know, having these human right violations, that these athletes could speak up and bring more awareness to them. But because they can't do that, these problems are kind of just brushed under the rug.
Yeah, that's actually something really important to know too. Just like in the sense that a lot of these athletes that are participating are of course like horrified by the situations that are occurring. And I do really believe that if they had at least the freedom to talk about it, and I know some of the fear in speaking out, as mentioned in the article, is that a lot of people in China who have actually spoken out against the Chinese government have actually gone missing, or if they return, they're kind of just watched. So I think that's a lot of the fear of sort of not speaking out against it. But had the athletes been given the sort, or if they are given the opportunity to sort of speak out about against it, I think it grant them more comfort and make them feel like they are still making the right choice and still participating in the Olympic Games, but also speaking out against the truth of like what is happening.
I wanted to focus on more on like the International Olympic Committee, and like we all agree how they're fully responsible, and I think it's kind of like messed up and also like wrong that they chose China, especially knowing what's happening with the concentration camps. And it's also kind of like I feel like the right thing to do would be not obviously not having the Olympics there, but also like kind of like shedding light on the wrongful actions being done. And the fact that they chose it there also like kind of like doesn't is kind of like pushing the whole issue aside, which is I feel like is kind of wrong. And the opposite should be done, and kind of like shedding light on these injustices. And yeah, basically that kind, as especially as a collective internationally, it should be done to kind of support human rights rather than not care about them.
Yeah, and I mean, as I mentioned before too, there's only so far that you can kind of like overlook politics and just say it's just politics. Because I mean, it is like very much a human rights thing. So at what point do we sort of distinguish between what is just politics and then what becomes like a human obligation to sort of respond to? And I mean, I think this happens a lot when it comes to the Olympics. I think a lot of the times the committee actually chooses places that are not the best suited, and a lot of the times because the games are so expensive and the stadiums take so long to build, a lot of the times it kind of creates more turmoil in like the places that they are placed in to host. But yeah, Abhi, what do you think?
I definitely think that there's the issue of, like, as I mentioned before, the committees themselves having to review these locations and really thoroughly checking their background. I'd say, just because in the article that we read, I remember they mentioned that China itself wasn't reviewed similarly to other countries, and it often, like, a lot of the protocols to review a lot of the horrible things going on there were just completely sidelined in favor of continuing to host the event, and I guess favoring profits, which I think is the biggest problem here, which is why I feel the athletes themselves are a little more how would I say, forgiven for this sort of issue, just because they don't really have a say and they don't really have a choice to go in this country, just because uh, a lot of them can morally object to this competition or where it's taking place, but it's a career choice at this point, so they can't really back out since this is a once in a lifetime thing, as I mentioned before. So knowing that, it definitely means that the committee themselves have a really huge pressure on themselves to perform and conduct these reviews and make sure that the locations that the competitions are being taken place are places that at least aren't places that at least have a respectful, how would I say, environment, and places that will not only conduct, how would I say, I guess, positivity to the competition as well, but also, allow for the Olympic Committee themselves to, I guess, even make profit. So that way, both sides are satisfied.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we all sort of agree that the committee is the sole like entity that is basically at fault for this. So I think just moving forward, like whether or not we're watching the Olympics, I think all Americans at least can put pressure on the Olympic Committee to make sure that they're aware of these issues and going forward choose places that are less problematic, basically, for the Olympic Games. So going into something a little more lighthearted, our assistant sports editor, Hansel Chu, who's actually on the panel today, wrote an article that covered the Super Bowl. Did any of you watch the Super Bowl, and how did your Super Bowl plans go? Hansel?
Yeah, so for the Super Bowl this year, it was a bit different because, of course, the LA team was able to make it into the Super Bowl, but um, after the Super Bowl, the ratings came out and it stated that this year's Super Bowl was the most watched Super Bowl in the past 5 years. I just feel like there was something different about the Super Bowl in the terms of there was two feel-good stories on both sides of the field. For the Rams, it was because all these players that were kind of negated upon by the media and kind of shunned upon, they all banded together and they all had a chip on the shoulder to make it work and show that, hey, we are all players that are still able to produce and put up, stats that can impact on the field. And on the other side of the field was the Cincinnati Bengals, and their story was that everyone thought that they were not going to make it far into the playoffs, that hey, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league, but they proved everybody wrong and they made it to the Super Bowl. So both sides had a really good feel good story, and it didn't really matter who came out on top because one team had to lose, and they were both feel good stories. So it was hard to choose against any team this year, and it just so happened that the home team won this year.
So before the Super Bowl, even the day of the Super Bowl, like I was super excited because I don't watch football usually, but the Super Bowl is like a huge event, and also having a home team being in the Super Bowl was pretty exciting. I also like found it super fascinating that the Rams were playing at their home stadium, and usually like this the stadium of the Super Bowl is chosen not at one of the home teams. And so that was pretty cool. And I also thought that the whole experience was pretty cool. I watched it at the dining hall, Glasgow dining hall, and that was fun. Yeah, it was crazy to see the final touchdown by Cooper Kupp. That was pretty exciting.
I actually never watched the Super Bowl. I'm not really a sports person like at all. So what I do is that after the Super Bowl, I usually watch the commercials that happen throughout. So the other day I watched like a YouTube compilation of all the commercials that came out. And that for me, that's like the funnest part of the Super Bowl. Not more like not watching it the actual day of, but like just watching the commercials afterwards, which is kind of funny. But like the one that I actually really liked was the one with Larry David for FTX, I guess crypto. where he's basically like, they're kind of just showing all the like inventions that have happened throughout time. And Larry David like is basically just rejecting all of them. I thought that was hilarious, just to sort of think of like how this world would be today had all those like pivotal inventions been just sort of rejected. Avi, you have something to say?
I mean, I was gonna say it's crazy, the whole game itself, the whole event, the halftime show, everything about it. Like first things first, I definitely wanted to continue on with what Siddhant said and highlighting Cooper Kupp and his final touchdown with the game-winning performance. I mean, his performance of the whole season was already pretty good. So going into this game, we already had pretty good expectations. But the thing for me is that I was really certain that the LA Rams at least had this in the bag, and I didn't really think the Bengals were gonna, put as much of a fight as they did. But considering that the game at one point was in favor of the Bengals themselves, and they could have took in this game had it not been for that final touchdown, really just made this game one of the best I think we've seen in the past couple of years, which I think really is really what is attributed to the high ratings beyond just the halftime show as well, which also was just spectacular considering all the acts and even the memes itself, because everybody has something to say about something that happened, whether it be Snoop Dogg or something, or one of the throwback events that happened. So seeing everything that kind of went on with the event, how everything was put up, and seeing like Hansel mentioned, the feel good side of both sides. I think both sides going in had plenty going for them. Oh my. And really seeing just everything going on, and after especially the pandemic, and really just experiencing this event, I think going forward, I think it gives us a lot of hope for more to come. And also just having a home team in the Super Bowl. I mean, LA did not sleep at all, so that victory was definitely well felt.
All right, and so that's all for our newsroom episode today. If you'd like to learn more about the topics covered today, read the articles on our website, highlandernews.org, or catch us on Instagram at HighlanderUCR. Thank you so much for listening in, and we'll catch you next week.